Hello, everybody. All right. All right. Well, welcome to the Mikestand. We're just gonna wait a few minutes to give people a chance to come in. While we wait, I'll put some music on. Got to take care of a couple things real quick, and then I'll be right back. So, I'll put some music on. All right. So here we are again. Let me just take a look here. Some stuff here. Let's see. So 4 minutes. So kind of go over real quick what we'll be talking about tonight. There wasn't a whole lot I could find on the. Hold on a sec. I gotta do one more quick little thing here. Turn the music back on for a moment. Just do one more quick little thing here. I'll be right back. All right. So, um, so what we have on tap for tonight, um, let me just take care of All right. So, so what we're gonna be talking about tonight, we're gonna there's gonna be a special edition of the Mike Stand. We're going to be instead of doing niche newscasts as we normally do, is there was no article. There was only really one story that came out today that I might have since there's like only one that would have taken no more than maybe 15 or 20 minutes. I decided to just push that. Maybe we would see more stories build up for tomorrow. So, what we're going to talk about today, we're going to do this is going to be a very special episode in which we're going to talk about animation in the United States in the television era. Now, I was thinking earlier today how since there wasn't a whole lot of news going on, niche news going on today. Um, I was thinking along the lines of, well, we don't talk about cartoons, right? I mean, yes, we've been talking a lot about like Velma lately and stuff going on with Seth Rogen's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but in terms of like animation cartoons, we don't really get as much a chance to talk about that, particularly the classic stuff, which is one of the things that of course I like to talk about. I grew up in the '80s. Some of you grew up in the '80s. Some of you grew up in the '70s. Many of us who I think are watching this channel, we come from a time when Saturday morning cartoons were the thing for us. We'd always look forward, getting up every Saturday morning, or whether it was getting up every Saturday morning um, or or either when we get up in the mornings we would be preparing for school, or when we got home after school, we'd look forward to turning on TV and catching our cartoons, whether they be the Saturday morning cartoons on the networks or various syndicated cartoons, depending upon the time you were living in, on any number of your at the time independent channels that where they would buy where they buy the the syndication rights to older cartoons. And you'd have some cartoons that would have like would be rearranged from earlier series as package series, like like Hanna-Barbera's World of Super Adventures, or Groovy Ghoulies and Friends, that kind of thing. The Bugs Bunny show. You know, um, Tom and Jerry as well, where they would have they would you know so so I figured, why don't we take a look at that time period and just remind everybody of some of our favorite stuff from when we're all growing up. Um, so without any further ado, I think I'll get started on that right now. Now that we're up to 9 minutes here, before I do that, let me just do this. All right. So, let's go ahead. Take a look at all that, and of course, if you can like and share the stream, that'd be appreciated. See if we can get more friendly people in here. Also, if anything I talk about grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions. I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. So why don't we go ahead and take a look here at what we got here. Of course, this is a wiki article. I know some people are critical of it, but critical of using wiki, but for basics, it's still okay. I mean, we all know that yeah, it does tend to have a left leaning emphasis, but for the basic information for our purposes, just to familiarize ourselves with certain things, um, that would be the with that, let's go ahead and take a look at this. So, animation in the United States in the television era was a period in the history of American animation that solely set in with the decline of theatrical animated short. Again, those animated shorts were were produced by studios like Warner Brothers, MGM, Paramount. Paramount through like famous studios. If you guys remember, like, so Warner, of course, had Looney Tunes, Merry Melodies. MGM, that was Tom and Jerry, Droopy, Barney Bear. Um, you had Paramount, which their animation arm was Famous Studios. That's where we got some of the colored versions of the Popeye shorts. After they bought out Fleischer Studios, it picked up like Popeye and Superman from Fleischer, and then also added a bunch of the stuff from Harvey Tunes, like Casper the Friendly Ghost and all that. Had other companies like Walter Lantz Productions with Woody Woodpecker, Andy Panda, Chili Willy that were also doing the shorts back then. Columbia Pictures did their set as well. So, but anyways, and the popularization of television animation during the late 1950s and to 60s peaked in the 1970s and ended in the mid to late 1980s. This era is characterized by low budgets, limited animation, an emphasis on television over the theater, and the general perception of cartoons being primarily for children. Now, mind you, you know that was even though if you think about it, the theatrical shorts were not necessarily originally, I think, produced for children. They were just produced for more of a general audience. You know, um, and there were even some forms of what you might call adult animation, even in the '60s. There, I mean, we were talking about it on the weekend edition this past weekend. Like the Flintstones was in prime time. So and so were a few other of some of the um, earlier works from from Hanna Barbera in particular. But anyways, let's see. Due to the perceived cheap production values, poor animation, and mixed critical and commercial reception, the era is sometimes referred to as the Dark Age or Bronze Age of American animation by critics. Um, Television animation developed from the success of animated movies in the first half of the 20th century. The state of animation changed dramatically in the 3 decades, starting with post World War II proliferation of television. Now you have to remember so to understand the times here too. So the post World War II period, which was considered, I think, from just after World War II, so end of 45 into 46 to the early 60s. That was somewhat that baby boomer generation, some people have often called it, because you had the soldiers coming home and they'd be starting families. You did have a very big domestic push. You had more people moving into the cities, and the suburbs were developing. I know where I live, the city I live in California here, we came about in 1960. We were incorporated in 1960. Um, but But yeah, so you had people, and the thing about the television was the television provided an entertainment, so you know prior, during the war and prior to the war, from when the radio became the thing in 1922. Radio as it developed from 1922 into the early 40s, you'd have families sitting around the radio every evening listening to like radio dramas, radio shows, and all that. And then, of course, once the war was over and we weren't focused as much on making weapons or the like, it turned to more commercial and domestic um, ventures, which television would become one. Television throughout, particularly throughout the 50s, would become a staple for American families. Let's see. All right, so let's see. While studios gave up on the big budget theatrical short cartoons that thrived in the golden age, new television animation studios would thrive based on the economy and volume of their output. Yeah, because what you'd have there is you'd have, for a theatrical short, you'd have a theatrical short particular company, you'd have anywhere from 4 to 6 a year. The theatrical shorts, you know, would, when they produce, would come on average about 7 minutes, 7 minutes of content right there. And with television without commercials, of course, you'd have you'd have a little over 3 times. You'd have like 22 to 24 minutes of content there without the commercials. They'd be, and so many popular characters emerged from this period, including Hanna-Barbera's Scooby-Doo, Josie and the Pussycat, Captain Caveman, Hong Kong Phooey, Filmation's He-Man. Filmation was doing stuff even before. He-Man was probably the most popular of his characters, but you also had Filmation's version of the Ghostbusters, which predates the quote-unquote real Ghostbusters. You'd have they even, as RJ Critical Blast was talking on his channel earlier, you had the DC cartoons that Filmation made in the late 60s there. The New Adventures of Superman, Adventures of Superboy, The Adventures of Aquaman, The Adventures of Batman. So let's see, Deke Entertainment's Inspector Gadget, which came out in the early 80s, of course, voiced by the late, great Don Adams. And Marvel Productions and Sunbow Productions of Transformers, along with G.I. Joe, the Real American Hero. The period came to an end in the late 1980s as many entertainment companies revived their animation franchises and returned to making high-budget, successful works. I think what they're talking about is a lot of the studios decided to start investing more in animated feature films as opposed to shorts or television product. So from the big screen to the small screen. Let's see if anybody's hey Woody. Hero. Yep. Hey Woody. Yeah, so if you haven't already, if you can like and share the stream, that would really help see if we can get some more friendly people here. Look at this. Thank you for being here, my friend. And of course, if anything else grabs your attention as I'm reading this, feel free to comment and or ask questions. I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. So here we go. From the big screen to the small screen, early experiments. There were a number of early experiments in limited animation television cartoons. I wonder if that's all one phrase or those are three separate. Let me just take a look here real quick. Well, limited animation and television. Okay. These cartoons usually were about 5 minutes in length and were episodic in nature, allowing stations to flexibly program them. One of the first images to be broadcast over television was that of Felix the Cat in 1928. In 1938, cartoonist Chad Rothkopf's 8-minute experimental Willy the Worm, cited as the first animated film created for TV, was shown on NBC. So, yeah, on the East Coast, televisions were already coming around. You know, I think from what I had done a little study of out west here, the first television station on the West Coast, no less west of the Mississippi, was here in LA with KTLA back in 1947. But that came obviously much later. I think by the late 30s, early 40s, on the East Coast, they were already, television was already starting to become a thing. So, let's see. All right, so all right. Another one of the first cartoons produced expressly for television was Crusader Rabbit, supposedly in 1950. A creation of Alexander Anderson and Jay Ward. Jay Ward, of course, that was Jay Ward Productions were the people who gave us George of the Jungle, I believe. We'll probably be reading a little bit more about that in a little bit here. Soundac, a small studio in Florida, was responsible for another early adventure serial, Colonel Bleep. Um, often existing programs would be a launching ground for new cartoon characters. In 1956, the Howdy Doody Show aired the first Gumby Clay animated cartoon from creator Art Clokey. Now, I even in the 80s when I was growing up, I remember, they in syndication they would be showing, the older Gumby cartoons, the claymation ones, when you had a heart and Gumby's a part of you. Um, so, let's see. Sam Singer earned a certain degree of infamy for his efforts at television animation, which included an animated adaptation of The Adventures of Paddy the Pelican, which may or may not have made it to air. And the original series, Bucky and Pepito, both of which have been cited as among the worst of their kind. All right, I have no idea why, but on the other hand, a long running series of animated shorts named Tom Terrific was produced by Terry Toons. Now, Terry Toons was also the company that gave us the Mighty Mouse, Heckle and Jekyll. So Terry Toons was basically the television animated um, arm of of Terry Comics, I believe, from Paul Terry. So, like as I said, you had Mighty Mouse, Heckle and Jekyll from there. Um, for the Captain Kangaroo show. Captain Kangaroo was a long time running kids show that went from the 50s well into the late 80s, I believe. Um, I remember, when by the time I was old enough, they were on early Saturday mornings on CBS. So, and this series was praised by film historian Leonard Maltin as one of the finest cartoons ever produced for television. Cartoons in the Golden Age, such as the works of the Fleischer Brothers and Tex Avery, contained topical and often suggestive humor, though they were seen primarily as children's entertainment by movie exhibitors. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is true. I mean, I'm sure many of you have seen some of those old some of those old shorts. Bugs Bunny dressing in drag. You know, let me see what else. Popeye smoking a pipe. Of course, and what some of the and one of the things we were talking about on Sunday. We just having that 2 straight days. It was coincidental how the Japanese released a WWE 2 wartime propaganda animated short, and then the U.S. with Fleischer Studios did one like a day later. So, and now those cartoons are pretty much banned for being quote unquote insensitive. So, let's see. Beginning in 1954, Walt Disney capitalized on the medium of television with his own weekly TV series, Disneyland. The ABC show popularized his new Disneyland theme park and began a decades-long series of TV broadcasts of Disney cartoons, which later expanded into Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color, which of course would then go to Wonderful World of Disney. Basically, what they're talking about there is the show would have. There were times that it would be sometimes it'd be a package show where they show some of the older Disney cartoon shorts. Other times they would feature like full length movies. I remember particularly from the '80s there were a few like Fuzz Bucket was one movie I remember specifically. In fact, we named one of our dog as a kid. We named one of our dogs Fuzz Bucket after that movie. So, um, yeah. So, Walt Disney recognized that the economics of the medium could not support his production standards and refused to go into TV animation. He still ordered the creation of one character exclusive to TV, Ludwig von Drake. The character segments would link compilations of the company's archived theatrical shorts as complete episodes, which is basically, Ludwig von Drake, of course, was, I believe, maybe of Austrian origin. It was set, they set him up to be like maybe an uncle of Donald Duck. Another, aside from Scrooge, of course. Um, he was to Disney what Seven Zark 7 was to Battle of the Planets. Okay, so that's essentially what that was all about. Let's see. How we do? All right. Well, as I said, if you guys can, if you can like and share the thing, see if we can get some more friendly people here. That'd be appreciated. And if anything grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions, and I will do the best I can to answer those questions. So, Saturday morning cartoons and TV specials. Now, this is something that many of the generation before me, my generation, and maybe the one after me are well aware of here. As TV became a phenomenon and began to draw audiences away from movie theaters, many children's TV shows included airing of theatrical cartoons in their schedule. This would bring about like a lot of the compilation, like a lot of the what they would call anthology wheel shows, in which stuff like, as I said, the Hanna-Barbera's World of Super Adventures, the Flintstone Funnies, Tom and Jerry, Looney Tunes, Merry Melody, the Bugs Bunny show, basically. You'd have a lot of these studios, they'd have the theatrical shorts, and then they would put shows together to where they could just randomly put cartoons on, over a period of like a half hour or an hour. Let's see, where are we at here? And this introduction this introduced a new generation of children to the cartoons of the 1920s and 30s. Yep, I remember there were times sometimes on I can remember there were times on like Sunday afternoon, Sunday out maybe sometime over the weekend. Sometimes it'd be Saturday morning, sometimes it'd be Sunday afternoon when KTLA. I think in fact it was on Sunday afternoons, I believe, at one point when can't remember the guy's name, but there was this guy that KTLA had. I think his first name was Tom. I don't remember his last name. He'd be sitting in like a recliner or something in his house, with the fire going, whatever, and he'd be introducing, pop. There was a point in time when they were showing like Popeye cartoon. They were showing, the old Little Rascal, in Three Stooges. So those live action shorts as well, the Little Rascal and Three Stooges shorts as well. Those live action shorts. Cartoon producer Paul Terry sold the rights to the Terrytoons cartoon library to television and retired from the business in the early 1950s. This guaranteed a long life for the characters of Mighty Mouse and Heckle and Jekyll, whose cartoons were syndicated and rerun in children's television programming blocks for the next 30 to 40 years. Yeah, that was right. Well, again, well through the 80s. I remember seeing some of those cartoons myself. By the late 1950s and 1960s, the perception of cartoons as children's entertainment was entrenched in the public consciousness. Enough so that the Federal Communications Commission Chairman Newton Minow, in his landmark 1961 speech, quote, television and the public interest, unquote, denounced the medium of animation as a whole and compared it to feeding children junk food all of the time, unquote. Animation began to disappear from movie theaters, while Disney continued to produce animated features after losing its founder. MGM and Warner Brothers closed their studios, outsourced their animation, and got out of it entirely by the end of the decade. Yeah. Well, and the FCC would be had odds with the animation industry throughout much of this time too, because there was a whole thing that came about in the 70s and 80s about the commercialization side of it. In fact, in the 80s, that they may point that out here, later in the article here, where some of the like G.I. Joe, Transformers, because these were cartoons based on toys, they had to put some kind of like PSA on there to where it wasn't just simply this cartoon, they're just trying to sell kids toys, and anyways, let's see. Animation on television focused almost exclusively on children, and the tradition of getting up early to watch Saturday morning cartoons became a weekly ritual for millions of kids, of American kids. Guilty as charged. Guilty as charged. The networks were glad to oblige their demands by providing hours-long blocks of cartoon shows. Now, out here, it was usually from like about 7 to noon. 7 in the morning to noon. Now, that was during the 80s. From what I've gone back and read, the networks would be doing those networks, and some of the networks on the East Coast would be doing them like 10 to 2, late morning, early afternoon. But I remember it being like 7 a.m. to noon. So I guess you would argue it would be 10 to 3, I guess, on the East Coast. But Let's see. Hanna-Barbera Productions became the leader of production of TV cartoons for children. Yeah, a number of their characters you saw on a number of Yogi Bear, Snagglepuss, Huckleberry Hound, Augie Doggy and Doggy Daddy, the Flintstones, the Jetsons, Johnny Quest. These, even their superhero line in the 70s with Space Ghost and Dino Boy, Birdman and Galaxy Trio, the Fantastic Four, Samson and young Samson, Shazam, all of these Herculoids, Moby Dick and Mighty Mightor, they'd become synonymous with Saturday mornings. Let's see. Let's see. A number of other studios produced TV cartoons such as Filmation, Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, the Archies, of course, most famously He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, Black Star, Brave Star, Filmation's Ghostbusters, and DePatie Frailing Enterprises, the Pink Panther, along with the Spectre, the Ant and the Aardvark. But Hanna-Barbera had developed a virtual lock in Saturday morning cartoons by the 1970s. And Ruby Spears also got into the act a little bit there with stuff like Fangface and Alvin and the Chipmunks as well. So I think Ruby Spears also did Centurions, I believe, as well. Such critics of Hanna-Barbera's style of limited animation, as Chuck Jones referred to it, disparagingly as quote-unquote illustrated radio. Yet, when one show was canceled, the studio usually had another one ready to replace it because they were so cheap to produce. I mean, you can't blame somebody for producing something that would sell well and cost little to produce. You can't. That's good business. Let's see. Let's see. All right. So, anyways, all right. So, anyways, continuing on here. From the mid 1960s to the early 1980s, several successful primetime animated TV specials aired. Because these one-shot cartoons were aired during primetime hours, in parentheses, and thus had to appeal to adults as well as children, in parentheses, they had to obtain higher ratings than their Saturday and weekday counterparts. CBS in particular allowed a large number of animated TV specials air on its network, and several of these continue to be repeated annually and sold on video and DVD. Of course, most notably of that group is the Mendelsohn productions of the Peanuts holiday specials, including a Charlie Brown Christmas, It's a Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, and of course some other specials like Race for Your Life, Charlie Brown. Let's see, and It's Charlie Brown. So it was one of the Rankin Bass Studio, which again was known for a number of their Christmas specials. Studio produced a number of stop motion specials geared towards popular holidays, including Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Frosty the Snowman, and Santa Claus Coming to Town, while Bill Melendez, who we were just talking about, long-running series of Peanut specials, won numerous awards, spawned 4 feature films, and even launched a Saturday morning series. Other attempts to bring comic strip characters to TV did not have anywhere near as much success until one of the Peanuts directors, Phil Roman, bought the Jim Davis comic strip Garfield and brought the Jim Davis comic strip Garfield to TV starting in 1982, resulting in 11 specials and a long-running animated series. Yeah. Well, I mean that, but also there were Popeye. Popeye had a couple of interesting shows in the 80s. They're like, well, one that came out in 78. All new Popeye Hour, and then Popeye and Son, which came out in 88. Um, uh, um, though the dominant Hanna-Barbera Productions launched a phenomenon with the 1981 premiere of The Smurfs on NBC. The Smurfs were based on a Belgian comic um, about little blue creatures who lived in the forest. Um, you know, in medieval Europe, set in like medieval Europe. Hmm. Huh. Let's see now. Very little else which they produced in the 1980s caught on. Yeah, by the 80s, Hanna Barbera was starting to wind down a bit. Even some of the late 80s work they did, like Yo Yogi, didn't last more than a season. By this, you know, there, I know that the syndicated runs of the older shows, like the older Yogi Bear segments from like the Yogi Bear show and Huckleberry Hound show and all that. A lot of those were still going on pretty strong on like weekday afternoons and all that in the early 80s. But um, let's see. Adding to this was the financial problems of their owner, Taft Broadcasting, which was taken over by Carl Lindner Jr., owner of Great American Insurance Company. In 1987, 2 years later, Tom Ruger, okay, in 1987, 2 years later, which would have been 1989, Tom Ruger launched the exodus of Hanna-Barbera employees to form a relaunched Warner Brothers animation division. In 1991, Turner Broadcasting System bought the company and its library. So that's why you had a lot of the Hanna-Barbera stuff showing up on Turner channels a lot in the early 90s there, early to mid 90s. Other studios offerings chipped away at the Hanna-Barbera Saturday dominance throughout the decade, such as Hanna-Barbera alumni Ruby Spears Productions, Alvin and the Chipmunks, Marvel and Jim Henson's Muppet Babies, Deke and Columbia's The Real Ghostbusters, and Phil Roman's Garfield and Friends. Additionally, the Saturday morning continued to see attempts to adapt primetime series for animation. Some successfully, Happy Days and its spin-offs, Mr. T, Alf the Animated Series, others less so. It's Punky Brewster, The Gary Coleman Show, and Little Rosie. In fact, Little Rosie, I didn't even know about Little Rosie until recently. That's how little that thing succeeded. Even I didn't know about Little Rosie until like recently, like a few months ago. So, after 3 decades of resistance, Disney finally entered Saturday morning in 1985 when the Gummy Bears and the Wuzzles um, debuted with significantly more substantial budgets. Gummy Bears bouncing here and there and everywhere. Find adventure that's beyond compare. They are the Gummy Bears. Yeah, the Gummy Bears lasted until 1992. They lasted for about 7, 8 seasons there. The first run syndication success of DuckTales, which premiered in 1987. Yeah, first run syndication means shows that were developed straight to syndication. They didn't have a network run at first. They just straight up went to syndication. Eventually inspired a whole block of Disney produced syndicated cartoons, which forced company studios to improve their own production. Yeah, some of you may remember some of those. One Disney afternoon, one Disney Saturday morning, one Disney afternoon. Of course, some of the shows that were coming out there in the late 80s, early 90s on the Disney blocks would of course include, DuckTales, Tailspin, Chippendales Rescue Rangers, Bonkers, Goof Troop, and Gargoyles. And other companies like Warner Brothers went that route as well. That's how we got the whole DCAU. The whole DCAU originated on a first run syndication basis. And then eventually, of course, in the 2000s, they would become part of Cartoon Network's lineups. But so let's see. The 1980s also saw a number of cartoons based on children's toys, such as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, G.I. Joe, Real American Hero, the Transformers, My Little Pony and Friends, He-Man and the Master of the Universe, She-Ra, Princess Power, Jem and the Holograms, Thundercats, Pound Puppies, and Care Bears. Yeah, and the thing is that, okay, they're gonna. Well, I should probably just go ahead and read the rest of this because this is what I was also alluding to earlier. This is what I was alluding to earlier when we were talking about it. There were even cartoons based on Pac-Man, video games, and the Rubik's Cube. I also remember, there were a number of cartoons based on video games. In fact, CBS had a programming block called the Saturday Supercade that featured characters such as Space Ace, Pole Position, Donkey Kong. Some of them even inspired feature films. While many of them were successful with children, shows like these were accused of being glorified toy commercials by parents groups such as Action for Children's Television. These groups also objected to the level of violence in many of these shows. ACT's efforts to curb these trends resulted in the Children's Television Act, enacted in 1990 and strictly enforced by the FCC starting in 1996. Yeah, so a lot of that actually even goes back into the 70s a bit. One of the things I was talking to you guys, one of the things I mentioned earlier is that's why some of these shows like He-Man and the Master of the Universe, G.I. Joe, why they ended up having those PSAs, because that was to actually counter the accusations these were just glorified toy commercials. They said, basically, so the animations they just threw in at the back end of the show, one of the characters coming on and talking about, whether it was something that was talked about in the show or not, just like, a number of, lessons, like, don't talk to strangers. Like, in fact, what's kind of funny too is, and I actually have that tape too, that cassette. Mr. T, right? Mr. T had an animated series, and from that they actually produced a soundtrack, and they had a song on there called Mr. T's Commandments. But yeah, so the companies, what they would do to counter a lot of the accusations of being glorified television commercials, they'd put a PSA on at the end of the show, to make it more educational. And then, of course, the Children's Television Act kind of solidified the idea that you had to put some form of education, EI programming, educational instructional television programming on Saturday mornings for kids. And you had to at least give like something like 3 hours of TV time. It did cause some problems for some parts of the country and all that. I remember watching some old USWA shows where they actually had to move their wrestling show from Saturday morning to Saturday night, to comply with the FCC rules with the Children's Television Act, because wrestling obviously has violence in it, and they didn't want kids seeing that. But anyway, so major animation studios. So these are some of the animation studios that many of us grew up on. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these companies and some of their histories. Hey, Gelf, long time no see. Hola, Mike. So Bath Gopher in here. No, Bat Goat. Bat Goat hasn't been around in a while. Um, he came back like once a couple weeks ago, but he's just been kind of doing his own thing. So, anyways, so let's get ready to move on. So, Hanna-Barbera, major animation studios. Hanna-Barbera. We're coming up on an hour mark here. Hanna-Barbera, the first major animation studio to produce cartoons exclusively for television was Hanna-Barbera Productions. When MGM closed its cartoon studio in 1957, Hanna-Barbera began producing cartoons directly for television. Finding an audience, yeah, because some of the people from like William Hanna and Joseph Barbera were actually former cartoon directors for MGM. They were, they actually came from MGM, and of course they brought some of their people over from MGM to do cartoons for them. So let's see. Finding an audience in the evening family hour time. I guess family hour was like that 7 to 8. The first animated series from Hanna-Barbera were NBC's Rough and Ready show, the first run syndication entry. The first run syndication entry, the Huckleberry Hound show, the Quick Draw McGraw show, and the Yogi Bear show. Now, the Yogi Bear show, of course, was spun off of Huckleberry Hound. Originally the Yogi Bear show was a segment on Huckleberry Hound show, and then he became so popular that he got his own show. Each of which followed a format of 3 shorts, each in approximate length of a one-reel short film. However, the studio hit its stride in 1960s. ABC's The Flintstones, the first half-hour animated sitcom. Now, we've talked about this before. The Flintstones were kind of an animated version of the Honeymooners. I've mentioned that before. Metal mentioned that this past Sunday when we were talking about it. Let's see. Like many of its immediate successors, it was originally aired during prime time when the whole family would be watching television. Yeah, so a lot of these shows that they're talking about would appeal to families because they'd be dealing with family issues. As I talked about a month ago, they actually Flintstones had on February 22nd, 1963, they had the episode air The Blessed Event, which was the episode in which Pebbles was born. as I mentioned, Pebbles was 60 years old. So, um, let's see. Continuing on here, let's see. Flintstones was the first of several primetime animated series from Hanna-Barbera, which included the Jetsons, in this case, a space age family, Top Cat, which basically was voiced by the late great Arnold Stang. Top Cat and his little group of Hep Cats, lived in the alleys of an unnamed city, just trying to find however ways to get themselves fed and all that. And Johnny Quest, which was of course a scientific adventure type of series, and Johnny and his friend Haji accompanying his dad and dad's assistant on expeditions. But after the end of the Flintstones in 1986, Hanna-Barbera largely turned its efforts to the growing market for Saturday morning cartoons outside of isolated series for first-run syndication in the 1970s, aimed at adults instead of children, such as Where's Huddles and Wait Till Your Father Gets Home. Now, Wait Till Your Father Gets Home, of course, starred the voice of Tom Bosley, late Tom Bosley, who, of course, known for his work as well as Howard Cunningham on Happy Days and Father Dowling from Father Dowling Mysteries. I'm going to take a quick moment here. Go off camera. Oh, there's all right. See what you. Oh well, I shall mark his chair with dough in heat for when he comes back. Oh boy. Yeah. Anyways, I'm gonna go off camera for a moment here to make some lighting adjustments. I'll be right back. Hopefully you're enjoying the content, and if you can help me out by liking and sharing the stream, see if we can get some more friendly people on here, that'd be appreciated. Anyways, let me just go ahead and put some music on while I go tend to a couple of things real quick. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. So if you haven't already, if can like and share the stream so we can get some more friendly people on here, that'd be appreciated. Also, anything here grabs your attention, um, feel free to comment and or ask questions. I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. So back to Hanna-Barbera here, this studio here. Hanna-Barbera was notorious for using common tropes in its series. Its original series of the late 1950s through the mid 1960s all featured anthropomorphic animals, usually an adult who would in turn impersonate a well known celebrity and child, aka like Yogi and Boo Boo, for example. And for those of you who don't know what a anthropomorphic animal is, it's the idea of an animal who shows human traits, like standing upright, for example, or talking, human speech. So just in case you didn't know what that was, interacting with the humans of their environment. After the immense success of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, which premiered on CBS in 1969, the next decade of Hanna-Barbera's animated output would follow that show's formula. A group of teenagers solving supernatural or apparently supernatural mysteries or fighting crime. Hanna-Barbera did it, but Ruby Spears did it too. So there's at least a couple companies I can tell you that. Of course, those series, Scooby-Doo, Where Are You was the first, but you also had Josie and the Pussycats, Jabberjaw, Fangface from Ruby Spears, Clue Club, Speed Buggy. In this case, Speed Buggy, he's still considered an anthropomorphic character because, even though it was a car, still was a car that showed human abilities, like at times, like being able to walk kind of like or crawl like a human, or even speak. So, yeah. Let's see. The Funky Phantom was another one. Comes to mind. Let's see now. Okay. Or fighting crime, usually with the help of a wacky animal or a ghost. The many incarnations of Scooby-Doo ran uninterrupted on CBS and then ABC for 17 years. So, basically 1969 to 1986, I believe, is what they're doing. Because you had Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Then you had the all-new Scooby-Doo movies, and then you had the Scooby-Doo show, and then you had the Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo show. And then you had, of course, the 13 Ghosts. Those are all the original Scooby-Doo. And then you had certain special type of Scooby-Doo shows, like the Scooby-Doo's All-Star Olympics, All-Star Laugh Olympics, Scooby's Funnies. So, during the late 1970s and early 1980s, Hanna-Barbera turned to adaptations of primetime sitcoms. It was not until the Smurfs. So, basically what they're talking about is like with Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, those type of shows. Let's see. It was not until the Smurfs in 1981 that Hanna-Barbera once again had anything successful outside of the Scooby template. It in turn led to a derivative series of Snorks, and Paw Paws. The Snorks was again a show that was paired up with Smurfs, oftentimes on the Saturday morning schedule, whereas the Smurfs were little blue creatures who lived in the forest and in medieval Europe. Snorks lived under the sea and had like little blowholes on the top of their, little blowholes on the top of their head. Paw Paws. papa bears, about little bear-like creatures. If Princess Papa, who with her medallion could awaken a totem that had a hawk, a bear, and a tortoise to help them fight their enemies in the air, on land, and in the sea. So the late 1980s and early 90s saw Hanna-Barbera join the numerous studios producing younger and junior versions of cartoon characters for the Saturday morning cartoons market, such as the Flintstone Kids and a pup named Scooby-Doo. I think we all remember those, right? Uh, let's see, where are we at on time? Yeah, we're over an hour already. Okay. Anyways, let's see. One of the problems with producing animation for television was the extremely labor-intensive animation process. While theatrical short subjects were previously produced in 6-month cycles or longer, network television needed a season of 10 to 20 half-hour episodes each year. This led to a number of shortcut techniques to speed up the production process, and the techniques of limited animation were applied to produce a great number of quickly produced low-budget TV cartoons. Hanna-Barbera also used limited animation for artistic reasons. With smaller, low-resolution screens, the company's namesakes reasoned that a limited style that focused on dialogue and close-up shots with bold outlines worked better than the fully detailed animation used in film shorts, which were designed for large theater screens. All right, so Hanna-Barbera was basically the top of the mountain, as it were. But we're going to look at some of these other animation studios as well. Let's see now. We continue on here. UPA. I believe it's United. Let's see. UPA Studio. United Productions of America. That's what it is. United Productions of America is what UPA is. Okay, so the UPA studio was one of the first victims of the TV animation market. In 1952, because of his left-wing social activism, John Hubley was dismissed from the studio under pressure from Columbia Pictures, who was itself under pressure from the HUAC. The HUAC was the House Un-American Committee. That was basically the congressional committee that was, the whole thing with McCarthyism and and basically the Red Scare and all that. The creative atmosphere post Hubley was not the same, and UPA's theatrical shorts ended in 1959. In order to stay afloat financially, UPA turned to television to sustain itself. The TV versions of Mr. Magoo and Dick Tracy were not successful and did nothing to reverse the studio's financial decline. In spite of the 1962 animated feature Gay Paris, distributed by Warner. Gay Paris, if you guys remember, that was the movie with the cats in it. Jean Tom, Maurice, Robespierre, that little group. Probably one of UPA's most successful projects. It featured the voices of Judy Garland and Robert Goulet, and a Harold Arlen Yip Harburg song score. and the beloved animated special Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol, UPA, was shut down in 1964. So yeah, so Gay Paris, the animated feature film Gay Paris, Mr. Magoo, Dick Tracy, and I believe Gerald McBoing Boing was also a part of the UPA. I could be wrong, but I believe Gerald McBoing Boing was also part of UPA as well. Jay Ward Productions. So let's look at this one now. Jay Ward Productions. The Jay Ward Studio, producer of the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, used limited animation in its series, but compensated with the satire of Cold War politics and popular culture and its offbeat humor. If you remember, Rocky and Bullwinkle would often be, battling Russian spies, Boris and Natasha. Let's see. Like the earlier Crusader Rabbit, the Rocky and Bullwinkle adventures were multi-part serials. The Ward Studio also, so I think, they did Crusader Rabbit too. The Ward Studio also produced George of the Jungle, as I had mentioned earlier, Super Chicken, and Tom Slick. It later produced a series of popular television commercials for Quaker Oat cereals, Captain Crunch, Quisp, and Quake. Another company that used the same animation studio as Jay Ward did was Total Television, most famous for the Underdog show. Total Television and Jay Ward animated productions were often mixed and aired together in syndication, leading to the two companies' shows to sometimes be confused with each other. So yeah, Jay Ward Productions was known, of course, primarily for Rocky and Bullwinkle, but also George of the Jungle, Super Chicken, Tom Slick. Filmation. Now, we all know a lot of the work from Filmation. I know RJ can tell you a lot about Filmation because RJ Carter, actually on his channel, has an interview he did with Lou Scheimer back years ago. Filmation, headed by Lou Scheimer and Norm Prescott, was another television animation studio that arose in the 1960s. Filmation was most famous for its acquisition of licenses to produce animated series based on other media. Of course, in the early days, that would include some of the DC Comics-based cartoons in the late 60s. The New Adventures of Superman, The Adventures of Superboy, The Adventures of Aquaman, The Adventures of Batman. Those and those series would and then of course have a bunch of other shorts that would go into those. At the Superman Aquaman hour and the Superman Batman hour, you'd also have, of course, some shorts from based on other characters like the Flash, Green Lantern, the Atom, Hawkman, Justice League, Teen Titans, the original Teen Titans of Wonder Girl, Aqualad, Speedy, and Kid Flash. You also had, of course, let's see, Star Trek, the animated series in '73, was also done by Filmation. And, of course, some of the Archie franchise cartoons out there in the late 60s, early 70s, like the new Archie's TV Funhouse. Those also were part of Sabrina and the Groovy Ghoulies. Let's see. It was one of few companies to keep all of its animation within the United States and did not use the aesthetics of limited animation preferred by Hanna-Barbera and UVA. Instead, Filmation productions relied on heavy usage of stock footage, rotoscoping, limited voice cast. Scheimer himself provided many. Yes, Lou Scheimer would actually do many of the support characters throughout his series. He was a number of support characters I know in He-Man and She-Ra. Some of the more famous ones include Orko. Did many of the anthropomorphic characters like Tack Track, like Cal in and yeah, they would usually have like about 5 to 7 cast members. Got to know Linda Garrett. Let's see. On the female side of it, Melanie Britt, his daughter Erica Scheimer, and Linda Gary were probably the 3 main female voice cast members who you hear a lot on there. And then on the male side, of course, Scheimer himself, Alan Oppenheimer, John Irwin, George DeCenzo. Let's see. And a balance of licensed animated series with lower budget live action ones, such as the Ghostbusters and Uncle Croc's Block. Uncle Croc's Block, that was a threesome of Wacky and Packy, Freddy Cat, and Mush, I believe. And Mush was kind of a parody of MASH, just with dogs as the in the role of the MASH group, to stay financially solvent. After a string of successes lasting well into 1980s, Filmation dissolved in 1989. Cambria Studios. Now, Cambria Studios is not one I know as much about, or maybe I do, and just supposedly I absolutely adored Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol. Yeah, I've seen that one too. That one's kind of an interesting one. Magoo in the role of Ebenezer Scrooge. There, Woody. Anyways, so Cambria Studios. One of the most infamous users of limited animation was Cambria Studios, which invented and patented a process known as Synchrovox, implementing it beginning in 19. Yeah, as I thought. I know lately I've been watching. I have seen some episodes of a particular cartoon called Clutch Cargo, which came from Cambria Studios here. While the process resulted in an extremely economical and quick and inexpensive product, thus making it ideal for television, it had a fatal flaw that prevented it from being taken seriously. The process involved inserting the moving lips of the voice actor over a still frame of the character's mouth. Yes. The result was that Cambria cartoon, Clutch Cargo, Space Angel, and Captain Fathom contained hardly any animation at all, and were effectively pictures, albeit well-drawn ones, that were of greater detail than other producers with words. Cambria switched to more mainstream limited animation process with the new Three Stooges in 1965. Went out of business shortly after. Yeah, I mean, the Clutch Cargo. If you ever see it, you'll know exactly what they're talking about. It does seem like, just seems kind of odd animation. Clutch Cargo originally came out in 5960. So, Disney. Disney. Huh. Um, in the 1960s, Walt Disney's current animated films, 101 Dalmatians, The Sword and the Stone, the live-action animated combo Mary Poppins, and Jungle Book, generated hefty revenue for the studio, as did the regular reissues of earlier animated films. Poppins, in particular, won 5 Academy Awards, received with the studio's first Best Picture nomination, and topped the 1964 box office charts while launching the film career of its star, Julie Andrews, who won an Oscar. Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color, now on NBC, became a Sunday night television institution that kept Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, Donald Duck, Daisy Duck, Goofy, and Pluto in the public consciousness long after the theatrical cartoon series had ended. Which is true because I can tell you as late as 1987, The Wonderful Walt Disney was a regular thing, whether it was on NBC or ABC. Okay? It was a Sunday night fixture well into 87. I can tell you that much. That much I do remember. Let's see. The anthology series ran until 1983. In 1961, Walt helped to establish the California Institute of Arts, which I think most people know as Cal Arts. Cal Arts. The founding of the institute was both a philanthropic gesture and a savvy investment by Disney, as the school provided plenty of creative talent for the companies in years to come. In 1966, the studio brought A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh character to the screen for the first time. In two of 4 animated featurettes, the second of which, Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day, won an Oscar, the last Walt Disney received. Wow. All right, so let's see. As we continue on here, let's see. The Disney empire was rocked to its core when Walt died from lung cancer on December 15th, 1966. While the studio tried to remain true to his vision, a common catchphrase at the time was, "What would Walt do?" The level of popularity and acclaim the studio received in earlier years eluded it in the 1970s. The theme parks, Disneyland and Walt Disney World, the latter having opened in 1971, ended up contributing more to the bottom line than the film division. Additionally, many veteran animators either retired or died, so the studio had to find ways to replace them. In 1973, Eric Larson started a training program for new animators. Studio's post-Walt animation fare consisted of features: The Aristocats, Robin Hood, The Rescuers, and The Fox and the Hound. The featurettes, It's Tough to Be a Bird, Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2, the small one, Winnie the Pooh and A Day for Eeyore, and Mickey's Christmas Carol. And the live-action animated hybrids, Bedknobs and Broomsticks and Pete's Dragon. Some of the films got mixed reactions from critics. Robin Hood, in particular, was widely criticized for reuse of animation from earlier films, especially in production number The Phony King of England. But this was done because the film had fallen way behind schedule. Still, all of these films were successful. In fact, that was the Robin Hood film where Robin Hood was a fox character. They had him as an anthropomorphic fox character, I believe. So, let's see. All these were successful, and many of them received Academy Award nominations, with 2 wins and one for the short Bird and another for the special effects in Bedknobs. Additionally, in keeping with Walt's original intentions, the first 3 Pooh featurettes were compiled into the 1977 feature The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. The most devastating development since Walt's death occurred in September of 1979 when studio animator Don Bluth led a walkout of himself and 11 of his supporters, in parentheses there, a large chunk of the studio's animation department at the time, including Gary Goldman and John Pomeroy. Fed up with the status quo at Disney, he and his acolytes left to start his own studio, which produced the short film Banjo and the Woodpile Cat and the feature film The Secret of Nim. Of course, Don Bluth Studios would later give us like All Dogs Go to Heaven too. If you guys remember that. Let's see. Disney entered the 1980s facing an uncertain future despite the respectable 39 trillion, or let's see, no, 39 billion, 900 trillion gross and some good reviews for The Fox and the Hound. The end of the Termite Terrace. Warner Brothers shut down its animation studio completely in 1963, and the directors of Termite Terrace went their separate ways. Fritz Frayling co-founded DePatie Frayling Enterprises, which produced Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies from 1964 to 1967. Warner Brothers 7 Arts reopened the studio 1967 and 1969, but the low-budget cartoons produced were not popular with critics or audiences then or now. Yeah, I think I've seen some of those 60s ones. They were definitely very different from the earlier ones. The new characters introduced during the 7 Arts period, such as Cool Cat, Bunny and Claude, Quick Brown Fox, and Rapid Rabbit, and Merlin the Magic Mouse, never caught on, while the Termite Terrace cartoons remained perennial television favorites through syndication and Saturday morning airings throughout the remainder of the 20th century. Termite Terrace. I wonder what that is, because I guess that's a nickname for I guess the Warner Brothers cartoons studio. I guess that was the classic characters. Chuck Jones and MGM. So a couple more here, and then we'll be done with what we're covering. In 1961, Chuck Jones moonlighted as a writer on the UPA feature Gay Paris. When Warner Brothers distributed the film the following year, they discovered that he had contributed to the film in violation of his exclusive contract and fired him. Jones teamed with Les Goldman to form Sib Tower 12 Productions, later renamed MGM Animation Visual Arts, to work with MGM on the Tom and Jerry series in the mid-1960s. His shorts were not as popular as the Hanna-Barbera originals, but more so than the Gene Deitch shorts. So basically, Chuck Jones would work for him. So as I mentioned before they formed Hanna-Barbera, William Hanna and Joseph Barbera were animators for MGM. They did a lot of they had a number of works in the 40s and 50s for, on the MGM stuff. And Gene Deitch was another animator for them in the late 60s, early 70s. So it produced overseas in the early 1960s. Jones then began producing a number of successful animated TV specials. His most famous special was How the Grinch Stole Christmas, a 1966 CBS adaptation of Dr. Seuss's story that still remains popular and has been released on video and DVD several times. Give me a quick sec. I'm going to go off camera here for a moment, but I will put some music on while I'm gone. All right, I'm back. So, let's continue on here. All right, so let's see, where were we? Okay, there we go. Jones also produced 3 animated adaptations of short stories from Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book, a full-length MGM feature film entitled The Phantom Tollbooth, and the 1970 TV version of Horton Hears a Who. DePatie Frayling. This was, of course, the company that gave us the Pink Panther. After leaving the remnants of Termite Terrace behind for good, Fritz Frayling and his new partner, David H. DePatie, went on to produce the Pink Panther cartoons during the 1960s and 70s, with the cartoons appearing almost simultaneously on television and in theaters through a distribution deal with United Artists. Frayling also produced several TV specials based on Dr. Seuss books throughout the 1970s, including The Cat in the Hat and The Lorax. In 1981, Fritz Frayling retired. The DePatie Frayling Enterprises studio was sold to Marvel Comics, and it continued under his lead as Marvel Productions. Of course, Marvel Productions would give us, like as we said, G.I. Joe, Real American Hero, Transformers. We would get Spider-Man series. Let's see, I believe Marvel Productions also gave us X-Men the Animated Series and Spider-Man the Animated Series in the 90s as well. So, the new studio focused almost exclusively on toy merchandising, and it found a new audience among young viewers. Such action-oriented cartoons as G.I. Joe, Real American Hero, and Transformers. So that's as much as we're going to cover for tonight on this. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Kind of a nice way to look back at a little bit of animation history. Looking at some of the studios that were active throughout that time, and remembering back to some of the cartoons that we grew up with. As it's now after an hour and a half here, probably will go a little longer here, but anyways, so before we head out, of course, I'm gonna do the wrestling wrap up, and then we'll probably start running down with this day in each history. So with that, let me see. So So last night's Raw didn't do much. Kind of was just standard fare for what they were trying to do to continue to prepare for this weekend's WrestleMania. I don't think any major news was. Let's see. Look like Randy Orton has donned a new look, as it were, shaving all his facial hair off. Let's see. And it looks more and more like the possibility that Cody might actually be winning the title this Sunday. Then maybe getting ready to take it off Roman, as it was reported last week he might be taking some time off after WrestleMania here. So, yeah. In AEW news, CM Punk seems to be the most hated man in professional wrestling right now. He went off last week on some of his co-workers, and the majority of them don't really want to see him come back. There are a couple of guys who wouldn't mind having him come back, FDR, but for the most part, he's basically just about alienated himself from many in the AEW locker room. Tomorrow night's Dynamite. Going to feature a few matches here. We'll talk about these real quick. Tomorrow night's Dynamite. See. I know Kenny Omega will be defending the U.S. title against Jeff Cobb. Jeff Cobb has a bit of a busy week this week. On Wednesday, of course, tomorrow night, he'll be challenging Kenny Omega for the IWGP United States heavyweight title. And also on tomorrow night's show, Orange Cassidy defends international title against the Butcher. In his first match back from injury, Adam Cole will be taking on Daniel Garcia. In a six-man tag match, the Blackpool Combat Club of Ring of Honor World Champion Claudio Castagnoli, Pure Champion Wheeler Yuta, and John Moxley will be taking on Dalton Castle and the Boys. Matt Hardy of the Firm takes on Jungle Boy Jack Perry, and Ruby Soho takes on her former tag partner Willow Nightingale. That's happening all tomorrow night. As of course, some of the stars of AEW some of them also work for Ring of Honor, will be preparing for this weekend's Supercard of Honor show. So that's about as much as I can talk about wrestling side of things. So I'll go ahead now and start to wrap things up here, as today is Tuesday, March the 28th, 2023. So let's take a look back at this day in Niche history. History! So on this day in Niche history, first off, we're going to head back 50 years ago, as on this date 50 years ago today, Jerry Lawler, with his tag partner Jim White at the time, would defeat Jackie Fargo and Jerry Jarrett, the father of Jeff Jarrett, for the NWA Mid-America Southern Tag Team title in Nashville. On this date 50 years ago today, Jerry Lawler and Jim White would defeat Mid-America Southern Tag Team Championship. I'm sorry. Jerry Lawler and Jim White would defeat Jackie Fargo and Jerry Jarrett for the NWA Mid-America Southern Tag Team Championship. On this date 50 years ago. So there we go with that one. Let's see. So with that, let's see. Moving on to the next piece of niche history here. On this date, 5 years ago today, in 2018, the 20th issue of Hellblazer, of course featuring John Constantine, would go on sale on this date back in 2018. Sold for $3.99, 32 pages. Part 2 of the Good Old Days storyline, written by Tim Seeley, with penciled by Davide Fabri, inked by Christian Dalia Vecchia, lettered by Sal Soprano, and Kerry Strachan did the coloring. So on this date, 5 years ago today, 20th issue of Hellblazer from DC went on sale on that day. And 2018 is just so nice that we're going to hit it twice. As on this date also on this date in 2018, Project IMS's the Project IMS's OVA, The Testament of Sister New Devil Departures, premiered on this date 5 years ago. So on this date 5 years ago today, Project IMS's OVA, The Testament of Sister New Devil Departures, was released on this date 5 years ago today. With that, I thank you all for being here tonight. I hope that you all enjoyed the content. Kind of, instead of doing a newscast tonight, we just kind of did, something else. There wasn't a whole lot I could find newsworthy, so I figured we'd do something a little different. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. And we'll be back here tomorrow with hopefully more news. Also, this Friday, RJ Carter will be joining me, as we will be, of course, continuing our look back to comic history. And we will be reading over, we'll be introducing you guys to Lev Gleason Productions, reading through Silver Streak Volume 1, Number 1. And with that, I hope to see you guys all back here tomorrow. Bye.